Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmaster, and honored guests, what I have to present to you may be one of the most important pieces of information that you will ever learn, especially if you decide to harness this power. What I'm going to share with you is simple, but unfortunately has gone unnoticed by far too many people for far too long. I plan to break into this topic by asking a simple but yet profound question. What is the reason of all problems, troubles, and heartaches experienced in our world? Now, don't answer that question out loud, but keep it in your own mind. What is the reason of all problems, troubles, and heartaches experienced in our world? The answer is human behavior. Now, you may dispute that, but there are literally thousands of examples one could give. Let me just throw out there one of them. Let's say guns. Of course, we're on the subject of the right to bear arms, which some people contest that we should have this right simply because of the murders or robberies or other evils that seem to come out from this entity. But in all honesty, we don't have a gun problem. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. What we really have is a human behavior problem. Teen pregnancy, for example, is not some virus you sniff and catch like a cold. Teen pregnancy is caused by a very specific human behavior. Now, the big question is, what are the two forces that literally control 99% of all human behavior? The first one is the desire to acquire happiness and pleasure, and the second is the need to avoid discomfort and pain. It is literally a pain versus pleasure principle, and that's what dominates 99% of all human behavior. Now, I want to illustrate some examples on actually how this works. Because if we take control of these two forces, then we can control human behavior. And whatever we associate and link either pain or pleasure to will actually control our behavior toward it. I want you all to imagine that we have a double fudge chocolate cake sitting before you. Now, depending on what you associate with that cake will determine your behavior toward it. Let's say someone approaches a cake and associates massive pain to, massive pleasure to eating that cake. Now, they may look at that cake and say, oh, it's delicious, or it's smooth and tasty, or it makes me feel good. Is that what drives you when you see that cake? Now, another person may come along and associate massive pain to the eating of that cake. They may say, oh, it's dripping with cholesterol, or it makes me fat, or gassy the next morning, or I'll gain weight, or I'll compromise my health goals, or I'll die 3 years earlier, or I'll look terrible, or I'll disappoint my spouse, etc., etc., etc. Is that what drives you when you see that cake? Depending on what you associate, either pain or pleasure toward that cake will inevitably determine your result and behavior toward it. I want to illustrate a little bit further on this concept with a relationship story. I actually heard about this from a very good friend of mine who actually practices this pain versus pleasure principle in his own life, but also teaches it to many others. There was this gentleman, a good fellow, and he talked actually with my friend, and he was telling him all about the qualities of this woman and how much he loved this woman. And my friend asked, well, when are you going to marry her? He said, I haven't even asked her out yet. He said, what? You're crazy about this woman. Why not? He said, oh, I'm afraid she's going to reject me. Immediately, my friend was able to pick out what was driving this man's behavior. Of course, rejection is another form of pain. My friend was smart and thought to play a little mind game with this fellow. So he said this. Okay, I want you to imagine in your mind's eye that you walk up to this woman and you ask her to go out with you. And she says yes. How does that make you feel? He says, oh, that makes me feel great. He says, good. Now I want you to imagine that you're making out with this woman. How does that make you feel? He says, oh, that makes me feel awesome. He says, good. Now I want you to imagine that you ask this woman to marry you someday. And she says yes. And you're walking hand in hand down the aisle, and this woman's going to live with you for the rest of your life. How does that make you feel? He says, it's a dream come true. I love it. He says, good. Now I want you to imagine another man coming into the picture and asking this woman out on a date, and she says yes. How does that make you feel? He says, I don't want to hear anything more about this. He said, no. I want you to imagine that this man is making out with this woman. How does that make you feel? He said, shut up. I don't want to hear this anymore. He said, no. I want you to imagine this man going and asking this woman to marry him someday. And she says yes. And they're walking hand in hand down the aisle, and this man's going to live the rest of his life with this woman simply because you blew it. How does that make you feel? He says, shut up, I don't want to hear this anymore. He said, then you go ask her out. And guess what? He did. And guess what? She said yes. Eventually, this man went to ask this woman to marry him someday. And guess what? She said yes. Now, recognize what just happened here when my friend switched the pain versus pleasure principle in this man's mind. It caused him to make a decision that permanently changed the course of this man's life forever. That is powerful. Don't ever underestimate the power of the two forces that literally control 99% of all human behavior. The desire to acquire happiness and pleasure and the need to avoid discomfort and pain. Take control of those two forces and you literally take control of your life. Madam Toastmaster?